Undergone or about to undergo surgery to have the hip devices removed. Barry Cummins has been talking to some of those affected who still have serious questions they want answered.
I'm relying on my left leg so much that my left hip is becoming sore, and that's obviously wearing out.
No one seems to be able to tell me what damage them irons actually can do in the blood system.
I've no one that I can turn around at this moment in time to speak to that I can give me some sound advice.
I was surprised when we were recalled that there were so many.
It's very hard to live with constant pain.
In terms of a life-changing operation, a hip op is right up there. For the vast majority of patients, a new hip works wonders, and it's big business for the makers of implants. Among the big players, Dupuis Orthopedics, owned by Johnson & Johnson. Last year, the company made a profit of $5 billion. But when a company recalls a product already in the bodies of 94,000 people across the world, the repercussions will reverberate for years to come. It's easy to remove something from a supermarket shelf, but when it's in your body, it's not that simple.
It's bad enough for people to have had one surgery, but now to think that they need a second surgery and then not knowing how long they're going to have to wait. It's affecting people's lives. They have to work, they have to get on with their lives.
The problem lies with two specific devices made from cobalt and chromium high-performance metals. In the total hip replacement model, a stem was attached to the leg along with a metal head and slotted into a metal cup in the hip. In the other device under recall, a similar cup was placed within the pelvis with a metal resurfacing at the top of the leg. But something has gone wrong in thousands of these hips, with over 3,000 Irish people potentially affected. The problem appears to be tiny metal shards wearing away in greater numbers than expected and entering the bloodstream. When failure rates reached 12 and 13% in the UK, the products were recalled throughout the world. In Cork, Antoinette Power is currently recovering from a hip operation, her third on her left side. The first hip she got there was a Dupuis ASR hip, which was inserted in her body in 2006 and removed 3 years later.
How many people around the world are not able to go through that second operation? You know, it makes life sound so cheap.
Antoinette's second and third hip implants were not Dupuis products. Given that her Dupuis device had to be removed the year before the company issued a worldwide recall for that particular device, Antoinette is wondering what effect that device might have had on her body.
The loss of life that people would have had in time, what I mean as in living, because of what we've gone through, what our children, our families have gone through. And nobody can pay us.
Over the past few weeks, we've travelled right across the country meeting people who've had the Dupuis hip implant, which is now subject to that worldwide recall. We've met people who have had the device taken out at this stage. We've also met people who still have that implant in their bodies, people who have many concerns, many questions, and for whom there are too few answers.
I attended my surgeon for a checkup, 6 months checkup, on Thursday. Everything was okay, said I was quite fine and I was doing well. And on Friday morning I got a phone call from Navan to say that I had one of the hips that were on the recall.
Tommy Cusson from Kells in County Meath is one of these people. He got a Dupuis hip for a new lease of life. It's still inside him and he currently has elevated levels of cobalt and chromium in his bloodstream.
Well, my main concern would be what actual levels of iron have I actually in the blood. The irons, I'd be more concerned about that and what damage they can do.
Right across the country, we've found patients worried about high levels of metals in their blood.
Bearing in mind that the Oxford Dictionary will tell you that toxic is poisonous, so I have a poisonous level of cobalt in my body, and what is it doing to my liver and other organs in my body? I just don't know.
People would be walking with me, maybe Hilda at first, and it sounds like you've got chewing gum stuck on one of your shoes. Every step it's like the joint is moving inside, and it's click, click, click. With each step, you've got a click. There's obviously a fault with this product now. If one binding against the other is creating fragmentation, and the fragmentation is going through your liver and your kidneys. If it's in your bloodstream, it has to be going through your liver, your kidney and your heart.
So just how bad is the situation? Well, figures vary throughout the world. Prime Time has learned that the failure rate for these products in Ireland has now risen to 9% and climbing. But experts in other countries have been ahead of the pack in spotting problems.
One day I'm a premier surgeon at Dupuy, take around the world to demonstrate surgery, and the next day I'm the worst surgeon and it's all my fault.
At the North Tees Hospital in North East England, surgeon Tony Nargall and his colleagues have now identified failures in 30% of the patients they've seen.
Typically, someone I revised a few weeks ago who, day before surgery, could walk 10 miles, had no pain, but his iron levels, I think, were around about 150 for his parts per billion of chromium. And when we revised him, this is just to give you an idea, what we found is that when we took out the cup, behind the cup into the pelvis, this was all replaced with metal, and it was just totally destroyed to the point where you could almost see the tissues inside the pelvis. So the bone had just dissolved. It was just replaced with pure metal. And no pain at all, and the findings were astounding, and we've seen this multiple times.
50 miles up the road, we meet Dr. Tom Joyce at Newcastle University, who in hundreds of lunchboxes is storing failed implants from around the world, including many from Ireland.
To the eye, anyone looking at that would think, well, that looks great. It's very smooth. You can see my image in there. We need the sophisticated equipment that we've got to actually determine how damaged this has become. The dark red area shows essentially a pristine condition. That's perfect. As we go to dark blue, then that shows high areas of wear, and essentially that shows the amount of metal that's come off that hip and gone into that individual patient.
From 2003 to 2010, a total of 3,282 people in Ireland received the hip implant. Most of those procedures were carried out in private hospitals, while more than a third were in public hospitals. Some surgeons were choosing to implant the Dupuy device more than others. A key issue of timing is central to this recall and how it affects patients. The devices were withdrawn in Australia in 2009. Dupuy issued a field safety notice to surgeons in March 2010, and it wasn't until August of that year that the products were finally recalled worldwide. Irish patients were still receiving the implant in the early part of last year, raising obvious questions.
From that March date, everyone realised the revision rates of this product were much higher than they should be. There was a substantial additional issue around this particular device that was unique to it. Therefore, the regulators in Europe and the international medical community and so on realised this product had a higher revision rate than was acceptable for patients. Therefore, action needed to be taken.
For the product to get on the Irish market, it merely needed approval from an official body within the EU. Irish authorities played no role in approving its use here. More alarmingly, perhaps, is that even tonight no register exists in this country to monitor and track joint implant failures. It was such a register in the UK that led to the worldwide recall. Right across the world, patients are preparing to take cases against Dupuy. With so many people affected, lawyers throughout the world are preparing to take on one of the world's pharmaceutical giants.
If you have a Dupuy hip replacement, it may be causing you swelling, bone fractures, tumours, and severe pain.
In the United States, litigation is at an advanced stage. Here in Ireland, a number of people affected by the hip recall have engaged solicitors.
You have a range of people from their early 30s to people who are in their 70s and every age in between. And you have a range of people from people who are Gardaí down to people who are housewives, and you've got people who would be in active things like farming.
Well, essentially our first role is to ensure that our clients are properly advised in terms of what problems they have and whether those problems arose as a result of a product defect. And essentially to do that, we have to engage outside experts to provide independent orthopaedic opinions. Essentially then, of course, people are entitled to be compensated if they have suffered an injury as a result of a product defect under the law of product liability.
So how much will this cost Dupuy? The HSE and private hospitals have already reached deals with Dupuy, seeing the company footing patients' bills. Dupuy were unable to provide anyone for interview, but in a statement said it is committed to addressing reasonable and customary costs of testing and treatment for patients, including revision surgery, lost wages and travel costs if necessary. It added its current metal-on-metal system, Ultinet, continues to perform well. As of tonight, 192 Irish patients have had revision surgeries. Another 96 are scheduled. 700 more patients face repeat blood tests. Most people who receive these Dupuy devices have no issues, but many patients remain deeply concerned about metal contamination. And among those facing the prospect of more surgery are some who will need to have 2 Dupuy ASR hips removed. Among them, Walter Hartree.
The right one, sorry, has given me the most problems, we'll say, discomfort-wise. But I just said, if I get the left one done, he said, no, you'd have to get the 2 of them done. So whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. So
whenever if you have to get the 2 done, that'd knock you back for whatever length of time, wouldn't it?
It should be a whole year. It should be a year out of your working life anyway, because it takes a good while to get back on your feet, you know.
I need them to follow it up, because after 7 years, if this thing which is still inside me is going to start increasing at the rate it has with the amount of cobalt and chromium in the blood, what am I going to be like in 12 months' time? I mean, I've gone off the scales now after 10 months, so where's this taking me? And as I said, it's the harm it may be doing to other organs in my body. I just don't know.
The report was from Barry Cummins. I'm now joined from Galway by consultant orthopaedic surgeon Bill Curtin, who's also the HSE Instant Management Team representative, and here in studio by Katrina Malloy, who's a patient focus. First of all, Bill Curtin, scale of this problem. How big a problem do you think it is, and how many people do you think could ultimately be affected by it?
Well, Miriam, just by way of introduction, I am an orthopaedic surgeon here in Galway, and I have performed 500 metal-on-metal hip replacements and 300 of the ASR type. The ASR was introduced into Ireland in 2003 and withdrawn in 2010. And during that time in the island of Ireland, about 3,500 hips were implanted. But in the overall context of joint replacement, there were actually 90,000 joints implanted during that period. So the ASR hips represented approximately 4% of the total. Now, since the recall, we have assessed all patients in relation to their hip function. We've assessed them clinically. We have performed x-rays, we have done blood tests, and we have done further investigations with MRI scanning as necessary. And as you mentioned in your programme, we have identified approximately 300 patients who either have had a revision or who will need a revision.
OK, let me come back in there for a moment, Bill, if that's OK. Sure. For instance, we heard that consultant there in Barry's piece saying, you know, in Britain, now they are ahead of us maybe in looking at cases that could go wrong. They're at a percentage rate of 30%, was significantly higher than our current 9%. Isn't there a real possibility that we are just not as advanced as they are in discovering the level of the problem?
Well, first of all, in terms of the recall, we in Ireland are ahead of most countries in Europe. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. And there is a tremendous difference or difficulty in making a direct comparison to a population of patients in England to the same population of patients in Ireland, because we don't know if they're matched for age, for sex, for the pathology that the hip replacement was done for. So it is really very important, not to import figures from another jurisdiction and apply them to the Irish situation, because that can engender unnecessary fear in a lot of patients whose hips are functioning very well.
How serious do you believe the effect of cobalt and chromium when it gets into your bloodstream is?
Well, first of all, for the patient, if the patient believes it's serious, then for us as orthopaedic surgeons, it is serious. Now, I've dealt with 300 plus such patients in the last year, and I basically divide patients into 2 groups. First of all, they're the patients with poorly functioning hips. Secondly, they're the patients with hips that are functioning well. Now, if a person has a poorly functioning hip, then irrespective of their iron levels in the blood, they are going to need their hips looked at very carefully. They will need further imaging. They may even progress to a revision operation. I think the difficulty arises is in those people whose hips are functioning very well, but who are concerned about iron levels in their blood. But if I can make one point, cobalt and chrome implants have been used in orthopedics for decades. Hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of these implants, have been inserted. And an analysis last year could only show a handful of patients who have documented toxicity.
Let me bring in Katrina Malloy there. How concerned are the people you speak to on a daily basis, Katrina?
They're very concerned, and I think you can see from the actual interviews by a number of people that they're very concerned. And I think, the information that they're being given isn't enough of information to be reassured. And I think a lot of patients felt that they were being fobbed off and they weren't really being listened to. Because I think to say, I don't know, is not good enough for people who have this implant in their body and, have high levels of ions. And for some people, they're actually rising. Like, will they actually be removed just for the high levels of toxicity without symptoms? Is that going to happen? And, what is a timely manner to be dealing with people for surgery? Because there's a lot of people, they don't know what to expect. They don't know how long they're going to have to wait. They don't know what the future holds for them in relation to their home life, their work life. There's a lot of what-ifs out there for people. And it's okay for me to take calls and listen to people or for experts to give information, but to talk to the patients directly, there's a lot of people feel they're not being listened to, them being fobbed off.
Okay, Bill Curtin, on that specific that Katrina mentioned about, is there a plan to maybe remove those implants for toxicity, even if they're not showing symptoms? Quick answer on that one, because I want to ask you another longer question.
Well, as I said, toxicity, is extremely rare. We do not see as clinicians toxicity from these implants.
Okay. Go on.
Yeah, and we have assessed all the patients clinically in the last year. We have seen them, we have talked to them. And we're now, some of us, on the second round of reviews of these patients. For example, Miriam, last Friday I held a special clinic in Galway for 50 patients. 12 rang up saying that they were absolutely fine, they had no concerns. And of the 38 that did attend, only 2 patients could honestly tell me that they had bad problems. But those 2 patients are very important. To us as orthopaedic surgeons, if they're concerned, we are concerned.
Katrina wants to come in there. Let Katrina Malloy come in there. Sorry, Bill.
Sure.
Go on.
I take that's very good and you're looking after your patients very well, but I think there's inconsistency across the board and I don't think every patient is receiving the same from all their consultants. What I would like to know, of all the patients that are being recalled, both public and privately, and especially the private clinics, is there anybody auditing the results of the MRIs, the X-rays, the blood test results? Because I know of patients who've been told they don't need a revision. They've gone for second opinions outside of Ireland, even out of their own areas, and have been told that they do need the surgery. And one particular patient had his a full hip replacement operated on by 2 orthopaedic surgeons, who was originally told by his private consultant that he didn't need to have any surgery.
Okay, well, that is worrying. Let Bill Curtin on that. On the thing about an audit, is there an audit going to be carried out?
Well, all the results, from all the Irish patients, is continuously being audited. As you said in your documentary, no, we don't have a national joint register, and that, I suppose, is a national failing. This is something that we as an institute have been looking for many, many years, but work towards that has been progressing rapidly over the last 5 years, and we're very hopeful.
Bill, let me ask you one other question. It was at the end of 2009 that Dupree, they actually recalled these implants in Australia, and then a field safety notice, a letter in other words, went out to all surgeons on the 8th of March 2010, pointing out the real dangers with them. And yet we continued to put them in patients until August. Why?
Well, I think going back to that, the lack of a register is terribly important in that regard. Because, for example, of my 300 patients that I had operated upon, my revision rate for this implant was only 1% at the time of the recall. So unless you have a register which is documenting large numbers of cases by many surgeons, we're left with our own experience. And Tony Nargol in England had a very poor experience, so he was alerted very early. If I had the same experience, I would have been singing from the same hymn sheet, I am sure.
Okay, last quick word. Katrina, people are worried tonight, they can contact you. that correct?
Yeah, they can contact us. We can try and help them whatever way possible to try and get information and support if they need it.
Okay, listen, Bill Curtin,
Sorry, Miriam, could I also add?
Very quick word.
Is that if patients are at all concerned, okay, and if patients, need to talk to their surgeons, they should call directly.
Okay, thanks for that, Bill Curtin. Thanks for joining us from Galway. Katrina, you too. And as Katrina and Bill were both saying, if you are worried at all and you want to talk to anyone about this issue, the Patient Focus helpline numbers are 01 885 1617 and 885 1611, and they're staffed from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. There's also an email address which is support@patientfocus.ie, or for more information on the Dupree recall, you can go to the HSE website. Richard.
That's it for tonight. News on 2 is at 11 o'clock. We're back at the usual time on Thursday night when Richard Downs will be reporting on the political upheaval in the United States. Until then, from all of us here, a very good night.